Hi, I'm so glad you could join me today to go over your daughter's audiogram and what it really means. I know when you first go to the doctor, excuse me, it can be very overwhelming. And there are a lot of new vocabulary words that don't particularly make sense. I know because when I first started learning about hearing and how it works, I too felt overwhelmed. So I want to explain a few things. Basically, I want to talk about the ear itself and how the whole mechanism works going within your body. When I first started thinking about hearing, I got this image in my head of a megaphone. You know, how oftentimes in the olden days people used those megaphones to filter ear in there. And basically, the inverse of yelling like a cheerleader from a narrow space to a large space to expand that sound, hearing coming in is almost the opposite because it's going to get narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. So the ear itself has a very unique structure to support that. So if you talk about the pinna or the ear itself, sound comes traveling into the ear and it hits the tympanic membrane, which is sort of kind of like a thick piece of skin, I guess is the best way to say it. It's very sensitive, and all of this fluid space responds to the sound wave because the sound is a wave, and when it hits that tympanic membrane, it begins moving back and forth, which of course then sets the ossicles or the bones within your middle ear, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, into motion, one pushing on the other. Now the stapes sits right on the cochlear and the oval window, and this compressed and more compressed space is the cochlea. So as that goes in there, the cochlea, which has covered with little cilia to receive those waves of sound coming through, goes right in here, and then passes out through the cochlear nerve into the brain, giving the brain input on what it is hearing. So if you think about it, this whole area is a tiny compressed space getting narrow and narrow as it goes in. So I'd like to show you, if we were to look at the cochlea and where sounds happen in it, you can see as it narrows, the numbers get smaller, which makes sense if you think about it because it's a smaller space. Now a sound wave on the cochlea is impacted by where its most intense moment is. This is a 200 hertz sound wave, and when it hit at its peak at 200. So right in here. So that was its highest point. So all of those sensory neurons sent all of that information to the brain, perceiving that particular sound. Now, when I think of the cochlea, I like to think of it kind of like a piano, where you have your low sounds at the left and your high sounds at the right, which also is reflected in the audiogram. But let's look at a cochlea split out and flattened, if it were to be that way. This kind of was enlightening to me when I was looking at this images, because this membrane that is what responds and transmits and holds the cilia and everything is very responsive in different ways, because not only is it narrower and widening, but this end is stiffer than this end. If it were all the same stiffness, it wouldn't respond differently as it moved through that membrane. So wave frequencies are affected by the membrane's actual physical structure, as well as the place that it reaches its peak. Now, when we look at an audiogram, and here's your daughter's audiogram. On here we have hertz, which are low sounds, going over to our high sounds. And we also have decibels. Those are our intensities. This area is our loudest sounds, and often we need ear protection when we're around this sound. And these are our softest sounds, maybe a whisper or dripping water or sounds of the wind or a really high-pitched bird noise. Now, with your daughter's particular hearing, when she was tested in a silent space, the circle being the right ear, and it's hard to perceive, but there is an X there that's showing her left ear. She pretty much stays the same in both ears with very little variation, except over here in the 4,000. hertz range. So I've put on here some sounds that she can't possibly hear to kind of give you an image of the things she is missing, things that are kind of close to where she's getting a little sketchy on here. It might be a clock ticking. She probably would hear a baby crying in a quiet atmosphere, and she would clearly hear all of these loud sounds. However, when you think about speech and you think about a perfect atmosphere, a classroom is not a perfect atmosphere. And when you think about sounds like the ling sounds, like ooh and other things, where do they fit on here? And when I look at this in yellow, you can see where those sounds that represent the different intensities and frequencies of sound, you can see where those yellow marks are. That's where they fit. So it's really pretty close to where she's hearing, but when I add this pink line, which in sensory neuroloss, which is what your daughter has, if there's noise, they lose 33.1% sound, according to studies. So I just mapped this on here to kind of show you how noise in a classroom could impact. And if you notice, all of the sounds in speech can be impacted by a noisy atmosphere. That is why the hearing aid is really, really critical for her, because without her hearing aid on, she's going to miss all of these sounds in a noisy atmosphere. So in addition to that, I would like to say that anytime she's got fluid in her ears or another ear infection, it could have as much of an impact as noise. So when you think about it, we've got to make sure that all of this area is being heard, because to pronounce her words clearly, she needs to have access to those sounds. In addition, I would like to add that when I'm talking to somebody with a hearing impairment, I like to look straight at them. I need to be close enough that they can speech read any part of my speech that perhaps they're missing in their particular sound range. I think also it's important, if you're wearing a mustache or something and you're trying to get some clear information to a child with a hearing loss, it's really important to kind of keep them trimmed up so that you can see the mouth clearly. Keep in mind also, the farther you are away, all of those things, speech reading, being able to hear, are all going to be impacted. So that is why in the classroom we like to have your daughter sit closer to the front, where she can see all of the items on the board and where she can best access speech reading for her teacher. Because if there is a sound she misses due to noise, she can speech read a certain portion of that based on what is, on her face. For example, like O, you can see a shape in my mouth that's different than E. So those things are clues to her if she's missing the sound. So it is really critical that she's close to the front and able to see what her teacher is saying as well as hear. Of course, we can talk later about amplification beyond the hearing aid, such as an FM unit, which I think would also be beneficial, because in a noisy classroom where sounds are happening all around, the access of speech from her teacher would be fed right into her hearing aid, which would completely eliminate most of that noise impact of her peers. So I just wanted to thank you today for coming in, and I would like to offer you my time now to answer any questions that are unclear, and I would like to send home this audiogram that I put the sounds, common sounds on top of her actual audiogram, so it would give you a visual to keep and to better understand, and maybe even to use to explain to relatives what your daughter's hearing loss is and how it is impacted, and what types of things would be best to accommodate her getting the maximum amount of access to sound and speech. So thank you for coming in. I really appreciate your time, and like I said, I'm here if you need to ask any questions at any time. Thank you.